This story takes place in the same house as the basement incident from when I was 3 years old. I was about 12 going on 13 at the time and had outgrown my previous bedroom, so my grandparents decided I needed a little more space. They helped me to move my things into the bedroom at the top of the landing on the second floor of the house just next door to my old bedroom. The first few nights I spent in the room were nothing special. Though I did feel a little uneasy at first, I attributed it to being that I was just not used to the room yet, but all the while I couldn't help but feel that I was being watched. About a week after I had moved into my new room, for whatever reason, something had woken me up around 3:30 in the morning. I don't know why, but something just told me to look towards my bedroom door. It was then I saw a faint red glow in my doorway. It looked like someone was burning a candle at the bottom of the stairs. The glow got stronger at first, then after a while, it faded out and disappeared. I tried to brush it off as just my imagination playing tricks on me. I closed my eyes and tried my best to get back to sleep, but not long after I closed my eyes, I heard what sounded like a set of heavy footsteps making their way up the stairs towards my bedroom. There are 13 steps on our staircase leading up to the second floor of our house, and as narrow as our hallway is, you could stop at the second to top step, lean over, and look directly into my bedroom. The footsteps stopped on the 12th step right outside my doorway, and I could feel a pair of eyes looking in on me. My heart was pounding like a drum, and I could barely breathe. I gathered what strength I could and jumped from my bedroom, ran to my bedroom door, and slammed it shut. I then heard the sound of the footsteps making their way back downstairs. I stayed there the rest of the night, huddled up against the back of my bedroom door. The following morning, my grandfather asked if I had woken up in the middle of the night and had gone downstairs into the kitchen. I told him I hadn't, but I did tell him what happened to me that night. He dismissed it as just being my imagination playing tricks on me, and that I was probably just seeing the lights of a passing car. Only one problem with that theory though. Our house is on a side street, and my bedroom doorway faces that street. If I had seen the light of a car going by, it would have come in from the window, not from the staircase outside my door, and it sure as hell wouldn't have been glowing red. My grandmother was able to convince my grandfather to go out and get a new lock for my bedroom door, and he installed it later that night. Several weeks went by without incident, and it was around the middle of spring at this point. I started sleeping with the chain on my bedroom door that my grandfather had installed for me. It took me forever to fall asleep because of the unnerving feeling of someone watching me, but I eventually passed out. I remember every detail of the dream I had that night as if it was just yesterday. I found myself standing in a long narrow corridor that, from what I remember, looked like a hospital. At one end of the hall it was all light, so bright that it was blinding. At the other end of the hall it was pitch black, so dark that you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. I remember feeling as though I was being stared down from the dark end of the hallway. I could just barely make out a figure standing there in the darkness, close enough to where I could just make out its form. It looked like a tall sort of humanoid figure wearing a black robe with a hood up hiding its face. My curiosity got the better of me as I remember slowly moving towards whatever this thing was, trying to get a better look at it. The last thing I remember before waking up was a pair of hands, almost skeletal in appearance, flying right at my face. When I awoke, my bedroom was freezing cold. It was almost like I had woken up in an industrial-sized freezer. Keep in mind it was springtime at this point, and since the house was so old, we had no central air conditioning, so there was no reason for it to be as cold as it was then. I remember lying there in my bed trying to scream out, but not being able to make a sound. I tried to scream as best I could, but all that escaped my lips was a whimper followed by a muffled gasps for air, and I could feel my eyes beginning to water. I tried to roll out of my bed, but I felt like I was being pinned down. My body was frozen, but I remember still being able to move my eyes. Something drew my attention towards my bedroom door again, and I was terrified to see that the chain was off the lock and the door was all the way open. No, it wasn't just slightly open. I mean, this goddamn door had the chain completely ripped off, and the door was completely wide open, almost as though someone had kicked it in with all of their strength. I was overwhelmed with a feeling of dread. It was like a feeling of death in the air. I could see that same figure standing in my bedroom doorway, just as I had seen it in my dream. More like a nightmare, really. I could feel that whatever this thing was, it was trying to get into the room. I could tell that whatever its intentions were, they weren't good, but there was something pushing it back. My grandmother was very devout in her faith as a Christian, and she had portraits of Jesus hanging in all of the bedrooms. As I remembered this, the feeling of dread slowly subsided. I turned my eyes away from the doorway and towards the portrait of Jesus that my grandmother had hung on the wall over my bed. I was then enveloped with a sense of warmth all through my body, from head to toe. It was like that kind of warm feeling you get when you're in the hospital and the nurse wraps you in a heated blanket. Whatever was trying to force its way into my room had finally left me as I glanced back to see it suddenly vanish from my door. That warm feeling stayed with me until I was able to rest again. It didn't take me but a few seconds to fall back asleep after that. I woke early the next morning, and I remember just breaking down into tears as I rolled out of my bed and onto the floor, on my hands and knees, shaking all over. I was still gasping for air. I called out for my grandmother when I finally managed to catch my breath, and she ran in from her bedroom when she heard me crying. I turned my eyes away from the doorway and towards the portrait of Jesus that my grandmother had hung on the wall over my bed. I was then enveloped with a sense of warmth all through my body, from head to toe. It was like that kind of warm feeling you get when you're in the hospital and the nurse wraps you in a heated blanket. Whatever was trying to force its way into my room had finally left me as I glanced back to see it suddenly vanish from my door. That warm feeling stayed with me until I was able to rest again. It didn't take me but a few seconds to fall back asleep after that. I woke early the next morning, and I remember just breaking down into tears as I rolled out of my bed and onto the floor, on my hands and knees, shaking all over. I was still gasping for air. I called out for my grandmother when I finally managed to catch my breath, and she ran in from her bedroom when she heard me crying. She helped me up from the floor and back onto the bed. I told her everything that had happened, and she just sat there with me, holding me in her arms. Once again, I was hit with that same warmth feeling as I sat there wrapped in her arms. That is something I will never forget. So I lived in the same house for about 10 years or so when this happened. Now I live at a dorm, and quite a few scary things happened to me and my sister as we shared a bedroom. We're only 3 years apart and both girls. She also didn't like to sleep alone at that time, like most kids. Well, about 5 years into living into that house, my sister was about 10 and she was at the top bunk of our bunk bed. In the middle of the night, she suddenly screamed, and I woke up, asking what happened. She said she looked over the bunk bed rail and saw a figure in white, a female, walking around. For the sake of keeping her calm, I told her it was me getting up to get a drink. She accepted it and went back to sleep. It wasn't me. Since then, nothing happened until we moved into a different room in the house, switching rooms with our parents since they were putting down new carpet. After that first week, I started getting woken up in the middle of the night from different things. Some of them were just something smacking my bed, like with a large book. Several times I woke up with someone whispering into my ear. I would hear things fall to the floor, but in the morning nothing had. There was only one time I ever saw anything, and I believe it to be a different, spirit than the one that woke me up all the time. It was standing over my bed, and for the few seconds I saw it, I saw my grandfather who died when I was 10. This was kind of weird, but I was almost expecting it, as 4 other people in my family had seen his spirit, and my grandmother thinks he's watching over us and keeping bad away. I screamed, and after that I stopped being woken up in the morning by whatever until it came back for a few months. But there were fewer incidents. Ever since I moved to my dorm room, there's been nothing, which is good. The only noise I hear is the person next door getting ready for work at 3 in the morning. And now, since my sister has taken over my bed at home, because there was a spider on hers and my bed was more comfortable, I've been sleeping in the guest/game room, my older brother's old room. I haven't had anything happen to me, Still, just thinking about it makes me freak out. My family never interested or believed in the supernatural or superstitions and thought they were only just fictional stories or tales to scare kids or people away. But that all changed when we moved into this house. When I used to live in Germany, I lived in a very small town that wasn't well known. There were about over 2,000 people living there, but it wasn't special and kind of a quiet out in the middle of nowhere place. When I was very young, around 5 or 6, my parents recently got a divorce, so we moved into this very old home that has been around since World War II and had had an interesting history with the previous owners being unknown. The house had 2 parts, with the downstairs being another house connected to the upstairs house. My grandma lived downstairs with her art studio as we lived upstairs from her. After 2 weeks since moving in, my sister was sick and my mom was at work, while I was with my babysitter at the park. My grandmother was taking care of my sister at the time, while she was alone with her at the house. My grandma decided to go outside for some fresh air in the backyard, while my sister fell asleep in her room in the upstairs portion of the house. While she was outside, she remembered she forgot to feed her rabbit, which was downstairs in the dining room. My grandma was in her mid-50s, but had a sight for sore eyes and was very keen on strange things going on. As my grandma got up, she felt an eerie feeling of someone watching her from the dining room window that looks out through my backyard. Turning around, she sees this full figure of a girl with light blonde hair and pale skin. She looked around my sister's age, 8, but she couldn't make out the face of who it was since they were standing in the corner of the window. My grandma was concerned that it was my sister who needed something from her, so she walked up to the upstairs to go check on her in her room, but she was sound asleep. When my sister woke up, my grandma recalled the moment and questioned her if it was her who was looking at her through the window. My sister was dazed and very confused and didn't really understand the question. She replied with, "I was asleep the whole time. I don't remember getting up for anything until dinner was ready." My grandma had a pale face. She was spooked and didn't mention what happened that morning after what my sister said to her. A few days later, my mom had a best friend who was considered her boyfriend at the time. They were in a very serious relationship and were planning on him moving in with us. He was also very young, around his mid-20s, and was very wealthy. He helped my mom out with getting a job, so she was very loyal to him. My mom invited him for dinner after work so that he was welcomed into our family and wanted us to meet him. When he walked through the door of our house, he had a weird feeling surrounding him and said that he felt very cold and nauseous. He didn't like the hallway of our house, as it goes from the kitchen to my room, which is at the end of the hall. It would always be dark in that hallway because the lights would break unexpectedly, so we kind of just gave up with having a light in the hallway. When he walked through the entrance, he went to the dining room to sit down. My sister sat next to me on the right end of the table and my grandma on the left of hers, with my mom across the table from her. Her boyfriend was sitting on the front part of the table facing me. While we were eating, my mom's boyfriend thought that he saw a flower vase move across the windowsill. Moving his head up, he saw the same white figure my grandma saw. He turned white as a sheet as it darted from the dining room to the living room and disappeared right in front of him into the next room. He dropped his silverware and flew back on his chair before grabbing his coat and dashing out of the house. He slammed the door hard enough to almost break the glass and later broke up with my mom after explaining what happened that night and vowed to never step foot in that house ever again. My mom got concerned as she was very confused on what had just happened and said he was overreacting, but was really heartbroken from him dumping her. A couple of more weird things started happening and became more frequent and violent as the weeks flew by. The clock in the kitchen would always rewind every hour. Light bulbs were being smashed and shattered everywhere. Kitchen drawers would be open, faucets would be turned on, and our furniture would be moved around. My mom got really fed up with the issue and didn't really understand what was going on. She would constantly blame me or my sister for misbehaving, but knew that it wasn't our faults and couldn't explain the unexpected and weird things that were going on until she told the neighbors that lived across from us the recent and old news that have happened since we lived in that house. Our neighbor was very curious, yet understood my mom's situation, so he invited her to have lunch with him to discuss it. The next day after we visited the neighbor, he told my mom some creepy information that made my mom's opinion on ghosts become more open and refreshed about the house and the area that we lived in. This area used to be a Jewish community before it was blown up by the Nazis in World War II and rebuilt as forts and houses. It was a massacre with lots of Jews being killed and sent off to camps. If you look through the bushes in your backyard, there are old gravestones hiding between the bushes and some rubble left from the houses and buildings in this area. My mom had chills all over her. Her red flags were going off and she turned pale in fear. However, my mom was reasonable and wanted to send the ghosts to a better place in peace. So she went to a synagogue to get a rabbi to cleanse the house so we can continue to live in it. He agreed to do so, and my mom thought her blessings were answered. By the time he arrived back to our house, he took a 180 and went from agreeing to refusing to cleanse the house from whatever is haunting it. He told my mom that there's too much evil in the atmosphere and refused to help her and told her to find someone else to help her with the situation. My mom decided that it was our time to leave and leave quickly. We packed everything up as fast as we could, making sure nothing is left behind or something could follow us on our way out. She took all of us into the car and sped off with our packed boxes and left the house completely, never saying goodbye to anyone, and just left without turning back. She swears to this day that whatever happened in that house will never be talked about again because of the amount of fright she had from living there, and will never step back into the town we lived in.